Good morning, class. Hey, it's Mr. Stewart, and I'm back. Sorry I missed the integrity lecture last week. Like I put in the announcement, so I've been kind of suffering from the allergy and sinus infection monster, and was coughing so much that I don't really think I could have got through one of these classes. And so I'm back. Here I am. I may be sniffling, snuffling, and still coughing just a bit, but should be pretty close to normal at this point. One thing to keep in mind this week, this is week 6, and you do have to take exam 2 by Sunday of this week. So that is due by Sunday night, 11:59 p.m. Please do not wait till 11 o'clock or 11:30 to take the test, just in case you have some problems. So, go ahead and try to get that test taken earlier than that. So make sure you get in there and get that exam taken. All right. Today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 looks at developmental theories of crime causation. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all the specific kind of different theories that are in this chapter, but I'm going to talk more from a global perspective on what developmental theories are, and basically the two types of developmental theories. Now, when you hear the term developmental theories, it has to do with more than just that criminal's immediate behavior at the time they committed the crime. We're going back and we're trying to explain that criminal behavior through who that person was as they developed. And I think that most of us at this point can understand that kids learn how to do certain things growing up. They learn how to act, they learn how to behave, they learn how to tie their shoes, they learn how to clean their room or how to get away with not cleaning their room, etc. Now, there's also, I guess, a set of theories that kind of go along with this, that if we see certain signs in children and if we recognize those signs, it's pretty indicative of how they're going to behave as adults. For example, if you have a very highly aggressive child who early on begins to engage in psychopathic / sociopathic type behaviors, then it's very likely that they're probably going to grow up to be an adult sociopath or psychopath. And what the definition of psychopath, sociopath, those terms are interchangeable at this point. What the definition of that is somebody that knows the difference between right and wrong, but they choose wrong because they get some sort of gratification from it. So developmental theories try to explain the adult criminality based upon going back and looking at things that kid was exposed to during childhood, during certain periods of development. Some of you may have taken human growth and development in psychology. I've taught that course several times, and you see that we develop along a particular course. Certain things happen psychologically at certain times, certain things happen physically at certain times as we are developing in age. So not only are we getting older, but things are happening with our body as we get older. And as somebody who is now past the big 4-0, I can definitely tell you things happen when you get older. So, and it's not nearly as nice as it was when I was going from childhood into adolescence and into adulthood. So we know that, we understand that we develop and we have different kind of stages of development. Well, crime causation and the explanation of crime causation is not a lot different from that under this particular theory, because what we're doing is we're trying to explain crime through what happened or what that kid was exposed to during those critical periods of development. Now, we have two basic kind of avenues to explore in developmental theories. One is what we call life course trajectory, and the other one is what we call latent trait. And life course really looks at kind of a chronological order of as things happen as you develop, and latent trait looks at that there were things that should have been visible in that child at birth or shortly after birth that really are governing their behavior today. So those are kind of the two major avenues we're going to talk about today. So the first one is life course theories. Life course theories are a set of theories that explain crime kind of under the assumption that it's a dynamic process influenced by lots of characteristics, traits, experiences, and behavior changes over the life course. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every kid who's exposed to really bad stuff is always going to turn out to be a criminal. It's basically how they adapt to that exposure is really what we're looking at. And not every kid goes through the same trajectory as far as crime causation either. But we can explain some instances of crime in many contexts through what we call life course trajectory. Now, what I like to talk about in regard to life courses, I'm going to present it in pretty general terms, and your book goes into a little more detail than this, but if you can understand it from this kind of global or skeletonized perspective, I don't think you'll have any problem understanding this theory. We look at a couple things. We look at what we call the age of onset of criminal behavior. That's when did that kid start engaging in delinquent or criminal behavior. And notice I said delinquent or criminal because many kids don't start out, being a criminal. They're doing things that they just shouldn't do at that age, which we call delinquent. Delinquent may not be illegal. It just may not be right for the kid to do at that age. Or it may be just a behavioral issue that we call delinquent. I mean, we used to call kids unruly if they wouldn't do what mom and dad said, and now we just call them delinquent. So, maybe they're just not taking direction, maybe they're not doing what mom and dad said, they're not behaving, they're not minding, but they're not really engaging in crime, so we don't call them criminals, we call them delinquents. So we look at how early that type of behavior starts, and then we look at when it stopped, if it did stop, because the age of onset and then basically the when that behavior stopped is really indicative of how they're going to behave as adults. And there are a couple different types of offenders in regard to life course theories that I think we need to take a look at. The first one is called an adolescent limited offender. And this is probably the most common criminal or delinquent behavior trajectory that a kid will follow. And basically is, they don't start real early. They don't really start offending or start being delinquent until they're in adolescence. And then they age out pretty quickly. And what that means is they get old enough that they begin to take on some responsibility. Here's an example for you. You got a 14-year-old, and the 14-year-old maybe starts hanging around with some bad kids. Maybe the 14-year-old is having a little bit of issue at home with this or that. Maybe they're not getting along with mom or dad, or not getting what they want when they want to get it, or even something like that. So let's say they start smoking, they start drinking, and maybe they shoplift a little bit. Or maybe they get into a couple fights, or maybe they begin to have some illicit sex. I don't want to say those are normal adolescent behaviors, but we see a lot of kids who engage in those, or at least some of those, or some combination of those. And those are not the kids that we're necessarily as worried about, because they're starting late. And typically what happens is, okay, friends move in and out of your life, and at this point, many of you guys understand that. I think I have two people that I graduated from high school with that I keep in touch with. And I had 217 people in my class, which wasn't a large class. But still, and I was friends with probably 90% of them at the time, but I mean, friends move in and out of your life at different aspects and different careers that I've had, different places I've lived. I've had friends, and then when I've moved or or change jobs or whatever, then those friends move out and new friends move in. Well, that's what happens to many kids, is that, as time progresses and interests change and things like that, then they move out of those associations, and then therefore they age out of that criminality or that delinquency. Other things also happen. Sometimes responsibility is smack you around a little bit. Let's say that same 14-year-old, by 16, they have a girlfriend, and they get a call from girlfriend, and girlfriend is pregnant. An abortion is out of the question. So that's some responsibility, smacks you in the face right there when you find out you're going to be a parent. And what a lot of kids do when they find out that they are now going to be a parent, that's when they quit doing what I would consider to be their childish activity and move into more adult activity. They take on the responsibility. That responsibility has smacked them around, hit them in the face, and they are now required to, okay, we're going to have to go out and get a job. We got to pay for some diapers. We got to pay for some formula. We're going to have to pay for some baby clothes. That stuff doesn't grow on trees. It's pretty doggone expensive, and so therefore they leave that delinquent or criminal behavior behind in lieu of being a more normal, ordinary, responsible person trying to meet their responsibilities. We see it happen when kids do graduate high school and they are forced to get a job, or they go to college and they have to get a job in college to pay expenses, or they buy a house or they buy a car. Those things don't pay for themselves. You have to get a job and you got to pay for it. So when responsibility hits you, a lot of times you will age out of that criminal behavior. And it's what we call a transient type of criminal behavior. You kind of move into it and move out of it. Years ago, we would have called that a stage. That kid was going through a stage. Yes, those kids need to be, if we see them engaging in that behavior, they need to be stopped. They need to be corrected. If they get caught by the authorities, by agents of social control, they do need to be punished. And many times that is the smack of responsibility too, when they realize that, oh, this isn't kid stuff anymore. I can actually go to jail for something, or we're going to fine you, and we just took every dollar you had. You'd been saving up for a car or something to pay court costs and restitution because you got out and did something stupid. So again, real world responsibility is very, very good for the adolescent limited offender in getting them to move back out of criminal behavior. And your book calls this, and especially in juvenile delinquency texts, they call this drift. Kids drift in and drift out. That is the adolescent limited offender. Now, the other type of offender is what we call a life course persistent offender. Typically, this type of offender begins to engage in this behavior, the delinquent, which in turn leads to criminal behavior, much earlier than the adolescent limited. When I say earlier, we have seen aggressive and sociopathic behavioral traits exhibited in kids as young as 3 years of age. Now, nobody wants to believe their 3-year-old's going to grow up to be a serial killer, and not that 3-year-old is going to grow up to be a serial killer. But when we talk about psychopathy and sociopathy, that's what we always equate to. That is a serial killer. That's a person that knows the difference between right and wrong. They choose wrong because they get gratification from it. They get off on it. Maybe there's some aspect of that behavior that they thoroughly enjoy. And it may very well be the part of causing pain and discomfort to other people, i.e. being a sadist or something like that. So the life course persister is a smaller group of offenders who start early and stay late in criminal behavior. They typically don't age out, or if they do age out, it's because they've got to be at such an advanced age that they can no longer offend anymore. Look at Charlie Manson. I know most of you have heard of Charlie Manson. If you hadn't, Google Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson serving life term without, he's been eligible for parole, but he's never been granted it. He's serving a life term for being the leader of a cult that engaged in several murders in the greater Los Angeles area, late 1960s, early 1970s. Charlie Manson was a criminal from the time he was a very young kid. I mean, he started out stealing cars and car parts, running prostitutes, forging checks, and then finally he was a cult leader that ordered murders to happen. So by the time he was 25 years old, he had spent more time behind bars than he had spent out. And he escaped from juvenile justice facilities. He exhibited psychopathic behavior at an early age. He didn't have much of a chance. His mother was a prostitute who, by all accounts, sold him for a pitcher of beer at one point. He was raised by grandparents. Didn't really take their wholesome raising, but he took after an uncle who was more of a mountain man, an anti-establishment type of person, and that kind of framed who Charles was. Well, Charles's mindset to commit crime was still there even after he was locked up, and it's been there up until the point that he's become a feeble old man. And he may very well be granted parole in the next few years if he continues to live, because he has got to the advanced age that he's probably going to age out of engaging in crime. He just probably wants to live out the rest of his days in peace and somebody leave him alone and not tell him what to do every second of the day. So Charlie Manson is a great example of a life course persistent offender, somebody that starts early and stays late. These are the types of offenders that we do have to worry about more severely in the criminal justice system, because they're the ones that are likely to engage in the more serious offenses. Your adolescent limited offenders will engage in more property crimes, vandalisms, maybe some burglaries, some thefts, an occasional simple assault, some fighting, things like that. Typically, they're not the ones that are robbing, raping, and killing. It's your life course persister offenders who have graduated to that point. They may have started with something very early and very simple type of delinquent behavior, and then it keeps graduating and building until they find a niche of whatever behavior that they really like to engage in, and they just continue on that path for a long period of time. They typically become career criminals, and the only thing that stops them is when we catch them, when we put them in jail, if we execute them, if they get killed out on the street, or they just get too old to offend. They typically don't necessarily make a decision to stop offending unless we have intervened in some shape, form, or fashion. So that's the difference between an adolescent limited and a life course persistent, and that's really what this whole first half of chapter 9 is when we're talking about life course fundamentals. And that goes into some more detail, but if you can understand that, I think you have a good handle on the life course perspective. Now, I want to talk for a few minutes about latent trait theories. Latent. Latent means hidden. That's what the term means. If you study criminalistics and you're talking about fingerprints, you see visible prints and latent prints. Latent prints are fingerprints that are there, but you can't see them. You have to bring them to the surface in some shape, form, or fashion in order to be able to see them and use them. Well, a latent trait is basically the same. It's a trait, and a trait is simply a behavioral characteristic. And it's a trait, therefore, that is hidden. It is not visible to the public unless you're really looking for it or you know how to develop the identity of that trait. The definition of a latent trait is a stable feature, characteristic, property, or condition present at birth or soon after that makes some people crime-prone over their life course. And these are certain behavioral characteristics. I mean, you may very well be born with brain chemistry that causes you to behave a certain way. You may have an inherited temperament that causes you to have a short temper, in which case you know that's probably going to lead to arguments, assaults, possibly crime over the life course unless you can get a handle on that temper. Maybe there's hormonal imbalances. Maybe there's organic brain damage. Maybe you were traumatized physically or emotionally as a child. That's also a major causal factor of crime in adults as we look at what happened to them as kids. Did something happen to them, and did they develop a latent trait because of the trauma that they experienced that in turn led them into criminal behavior at a later time? So, I mean, really and truly, latent trait theory is as simple as that. It's a hidden or not visible trait that either you can be born with, or it can develop in you due to your experiences or trauma or something that happened to you. Maybe it's just your home life can cause those latent traits to appear. And we typically don't necessarily notice them until that person gets to be an adult, and then we go back and we look at why are they committing crimes now, and we look at their childhood and we can say, there it is. Now that's not meaning to get them off from their crimes, from being punished from their crimes, but it's trying to explain their criminal behavior, because we always want to know why. Because if we know why somebody's engaging in crime, pardon me, then we may very well be able to recognize that in future people and future children, develop programs so that we can keep some of those latent traits from developing, or we can bring them to the surface so that they can be dealt with early instead of kind of hiding out and festering and causing a change, a psychological or emotional change in that person, which of course can affect their behavior. And when behavior is affected, then it could turn to criminality. It doesn't always, but I'm just saying that's kind of the logical progression of events there. Make sure you read over what's called the general theory of crime and the integrated theory of crime, and you know what the definition of those are, and how they're alike, how they're different. And you also want to be able to critique that general theory of crime. There's a section in your book, 244, 245, talks about critiquing that theory, because every theory of crime that's out there are problems with it. That's why we have so many theories, because somebody tries to come up with a theory to explain this and explain that, and it works until somebody finds the problems with it, and so then somebody else comes up with another theory. So please make sure you read that. If you have questions, problems, concerns, make sure you reach out to me. Take that test prior to Sunday evening, and have a good 4th of July. Happy Independence Day, class, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.